Explore Guyana's business landscape with Above Board, brought to you by Cerulean Incorporated. Join host Dianna DaSilva-Glasgow as she interviews top business leaders, revealing insights into thriving industries and investment opportunities. Covering tech innovations to entrepreneurial strategies, Above Board is your guide to successful investing in Guyana. Dive into prosperity with us. Your journey to insights and opportunity starts here.
Hello and welcome to Above Board. I am your host, Dianna DaSilva-Glasgow. Today's guest is Dr. Dianna DaSilva-Glasgow. Dr. DaSilva-Glasgow is a trade and economic development policy specialist and is the Dean and Senior Lecturer at the Department of Economics of the University of Guyana. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. DaSilva-Glasgow.
Thank you for having me, Linda. I'm certainly excited to be a part of this podcast. I look forward to the discussion.
And listeners, Dr. Glasgow has also worked extensively in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Guyana, where this is the ministry that deals with a lot of international trade. So we do have an expert in the house. At this time, I want to talk to you, Dianna, a little bit about market analysis. What is your assessment of the current economic situation in Guyana, and how might it impact trade and export opportunities here?
All right. So when we survey the economic environment in Guyana, what would be dominant in terms of the performance of the market is the fact that we are in a significant growth stage. That great growth is consequent to the discovery of oil and gas resources and the commencement of commercial exportation of oil and gas. And that has created a ripple effect in the rest of the economy. So the economic environment is one that is quite favorable, quite supportive of growth. What that means for trade is that two things. On the import side, it means that we can expect an increase in demand for a wide variety of goods from consumers. Typically, as incomes change, people tend to expand their basket of commodities that they consume. So we can expect increased importation, both from traditional markets as well as emerging markets, because Guyanese are also going to at some point begin to explore niche products. They're going to diversify their tastes and preferences and demand different qualities of products. So we're going to have an expansion in imports from our traditional markets as well as opportunities for new markets. With respect to exports, it also means that there's going to be growth. But that growth is not going to come only from the oil and gas sector, but also from other sectors. The oil and gas sector is expected to be a lubricant to stimulate productive activities in the rest of the economy. So we've already seen an expansion of rice exports, not necessarily linked to the oil and gas sector. But traditionally, one of the challenges that we faced was not having a strong manufacturing base because of energy and other related challenges. As we're now in a position to provide the financial resources to placate those challenges, what we'll find is that manufacturing capacity is going to expand, and we're going to have an emergence of a few niche industries. We could also expect growth in the services industry. So it's really a significant period in our economic history where we are transitioning from a low growth path traditionally to now being essentially on a new level where we're able to sustain a high level of growth over the forthcoming periods, the foreseeable future, I should say.
Right. Thank you so much for this, Dr. DaSilva-Glasgow. One of the things that we are seeing, even when you enter the supermarket or you enter organization, you see that, for one, we see consumer choice being increased in terms of what is available, but we are also seeing exactly what you said, that there is, the basket of consumables is just increasing, and I see that every day myself, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, there are planned priorities that the government of Guyana would have. And in your estimation, which of the industries or sectors do you believe presents the most promising trade and export potential, other than the oil and gas?
All right, so there are two I would want to point out, but one is at the top of my mind more than the other, and that one is agriculture. Um, Guyana, as you are aware, has the lead responsibility for agricultural transformation within the CARICOM sub-region. The region has also had a traditional challenge of being a significant net importer of food. The government, once assuming office, has expressly indicated its drive to turn that situation around. And so they're pushing the agricultural sector through various initiatives, both at the regional and at the national level. So apart from the oil and gas sector, uh, there is clear interest in pushing commercial production of agricultural products to respond both to regional demand as well as to take advantage of export opportunities abroad. We have the land mass, we have the arable land. What we have not had is a strong commercial presence in the agricultural sector. Traditionally, the sector was really just peasant type and small farmer type systems. But to really have an impact on food security, the push now is to transform that rather, and to facilitate as much investments into the sector on a large scale. So you would have heard of large scale production of corn and soya in the hinterland regions by Brazilian investors, for instance, and there are other initiatives. So this is certainly a sector that is much enthusiasm and interest in pushing. The other one I wanted to point out was construction, infrastructure development, because we recognize that this is an important services input in order to really have an impact on productivity and competitiveness in the goods sector. So there is currently a drive to expand and improve the range of the country's infrastructure, bridges across major rivers, construction of major feeder roads, etc. And perhaps another viable area, I know I said two, is tourism, where we're already seeing an injection of quite a few internationally recognized hotel brands. There may be scope in other areas, including in ecotourism in the hinterland region. So those are some of the sectors I believe offering the most attractive options at the moment, because there's clearly a policy interest in pushing those sectors.
Right. And for any visitors coming into Guyana, they will note the vast amount of construction activity, even
Right,
from the airport all the way down to Georgetown, the capital city. You will
right,
literally observe quite a bit of roadworks, quite a bit of construction type activity. And also thinking about the agriculture sector, the soya and the
corn,
corn farming is making the news. Folks
right.
can literally see that if they were to check the news of Guyana online. And I think this is a vast project and can really only augur well for the economic development of Guyana. I know that you were part of the regulatory and legal, frameworks and policy development for a long time, and so I wanted to find out from you about those regulatory, policy, legal frameworks governing, trade and export environment in Guyana. What are some of those regulations, policies that you can point to that stimulates that environment?
Right. In terms of the regulatory environment, let me start by indicating that we are party to several international agreements, trade agreements. And those define the conditionalities, the principles that should guide our engagement with foreign partners, starting with our commitments to the level of the WTO and filtering all the way down to regional agreements and bilateral agreements. So the regional level, the Treaty of Chaguaramas that provided the basis for the CARICOM Community Customs Union has a significant defining impact on our regulatory environment. With respect to imports, for instance, Guyana administers the Common External Tariff Regime on all products coming into the region. And again, that's because we're part of the CARICOM Customs Union, where we have agreed that we're going to together define our external tariff wall against non-members. So this regime is administered by the Revenue Authority on all products that come into the market. So for any company seeking to send products to Guyana or any CARICOM country, it would be useful to familiarize themselves with the tariff requirements associated with various products, which is publicly accessible. So that's a very important regulatory requirement that we have in place. And there are other agreements where we have specific tariff rates that are indicated for various types of products. The CARIFORUM EU Economic Partnership Agreement, for instance. We do also have, as part of our trade agreements, I would say an architecture for preferential trading. Under the CARIPCAN arrangement, for instance, we do have products that qualify for duty-free exportation. Well, not importation in this case, but exportation to the CARICOM, the Canadian market, which means that Canada is going to waive certain import duties on those products. There's the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which I like to say is really an unexplored opportunity because it offers a range of preferential access on different types of products, over 5,000 tariff lines to be specific. But we take advantage of just 10%. And I think that's a useful indication of investment opportunities if we're investing to target export markets, because the regulatory environment that is in place governs not only importation, but exports, the benefits that we're able to tap into when we export to different partners as a result of the trade agreements that we have agreed to. So going back to importation, if you're bringing products into the Guyanese market, you need to be familiar with the tariff regime in place, which is the CARICOM Common External Tariff that is administered by the Guyana Revenue Authority. There may be other duties like value-added tax and excise taxes. Also important to note with respect to the regulatory environment is the role of standards in the importation process. We do have the Guyana Bureau of Standards, the National Bureau of Standards, that sets requirements for products to comply with. And there are other entities that define certain standards that companies that are required to comply with respect, for instance, with respect to agricultural products. The food safety requirements that you have to comply with. This is an area that we're still doing work on because the Guyana Food Safety Authority was only recently launched. And so you find most of the regulatory environment has to do with ensuring that Guyanese companies exporting abroad are compliant with the import requirements of important markets. For instance, ensuring that we have hazard analysis, critical control points regulations in place. If we're going to export fish to China, to the United States, and to other markets. But with respect to importation, there's still a lot of work that we're doing. But it's still important, nonetheless, to take note of the standards that are required for importation of different products. Another important point to note is the role of permits, which are administered by the Ministry of Tourism, Industry and Commerce.
I was just about coming to ask you about compliance measures, so you can address that.
Yes, you have to comply with import permits. So if you're going to import products it is useful to first determine if an import permit is required, and it's required on a range of products, several of which are agricultural type products. There are also export permits required as well. Exportation of gold, for instance, you need to be appropriately licensed. You need to get the clearance. If you're going to import, let's say, live animals, you also need the requisite approval from the Guyana Livestock and Development Authority. So there are a range of products. I don't want to be too specific in mentioning all of them, but there are some products that if you're going to export, you need an export license. There are some products that require an import license if you're going to import them. And so it's important to check with the regulatory authorities to ensure that you are compliant with the established procedures. So it's understanding your tariff obligations, knowing whether an import license is required and where it has to be obtained, which is the competent authority that is going to administer that. Those are generally the regulatory requirements that companies need to pay attention to if they want to conduct trade with Guyana.
With Guyana. Thank you so much for this extensive explanation, because I think this is so important for companies coming in that we can't. I gave you that time to explain, because I know there is a lot more that investors would need to sit down and have proper conversations about some of those requirements coming in. I wanted to ask you about how do you think that local foreign investors can build relationships with local businesses to enhance their market presence? I'm particularly talking about collaborations and partnerships within this environment. What advice would you give to foreign investors in that regard?
Right, collaboration is somewhat obligatory in the current policy environment because of our local content legislation. So if you're going to come into the market, it's very useful to consider collaboration, to see it in fact as a must, because it will also ensure that you're able to comfortably insert yourselves into the local market because you have a partner who's familiar with the regulatory environment, who's familiar with the market environment with respect to demand preferences and so forth, and can therefore help you to navigate effectively. To make your partnership an effective one, for it to take place effectively, I would point potential investors to the umbrella private associations, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industries, for instance, the Georgetown Manufacturing and Services Association. Those are agencies that bring together local companies, and therefore they're a good conduit or a good liaison to put you in contact with other entities on the ground that you might be able to collaborate with. So a good focal point, if you want to understand the market and to determine who you should collaborate with, would be to rap at the doors of those umbrella associations and then allow them to navigate you, to guide you appropriately. But I would certainly reinforce the importance of collaboration and encourage businesses to seek the support of those umbrella associations. Private sector commission could also provide some support, and they're going to provide the assistance needed to ensure that you're able to make connections with relevant partners. Of course, companies can also do their own research, internet surfing, to see what companies exist. But I think if you want to ensure you have a due diligence process completed in terms of knowing that this partner is somebody that you can trust with a business venture, then it makes sense to go through the umbrella associations, where you would have the assurance that this is a viable company, a company with integrity that you can undertake business relations with.
Thank you so much, Diana, for sharing that. That's so important these days. We see so many partnerships happening in Guyana at this time. So, I think it's such an important conversation regarding the collaboration and partnerships. I wanted to move into the issue of transportation and logistics infrastructure in Guyana. Can you point to any, could you give any advice or even tell us have you seen any shortcomings as it relates to transport and logistics that should be of concern or should be brought up at this time?
Yes. And I'm going to be very brief because this is not an area we have done a lot of exploratory work. But yes, transportation and logistics is an area where we have significant shortcomings. And there are two things I want to point out. We in the past we've not had a very significant degree of connectivity. Let's use flying, for instance. We've had connectivity with the major markets in the West, well, mainly in the West actually, because it's only recently that we've connected with the UK, because we now have visa free travel, and we're now exploring that with Canada. So traditionally, connectivity was a limitation, and that prevented us from really exploiting the agricultural potential that we had. We had the productive capacity, but we really didn't have the connectivity to get products to markets. We also had limitations with respect to sea cargo, the number of vessels plying the water. We had our own infrastructural limitations in not being able to facilitate a deep water harbor, for instance, and the number of vessels that come. And another limitation that we had is not being able to really send out the volumes of goods that would necessitate that larger ships really provide their services to us. So we've had those challenges, and I know there are planned investments in those areas. So certainly they should be circumvented in the near future. The other problem I wanted to point out was connectivity within the region. Yes, connectivity within the region, which is also very limited, both with respect to air cargo and sea cargo. But both in terms of the infrastructure, logistics, in terms of service provision, those have been areas of significant limitations on our export capacity. And as I indicated earlier, they should be addressed in the near future. So they should not continue to be a significant challenge.
And we all know that volumes of trade has a way of directly impacting transportation. You know, it's as that happens, it's almost like a symbiotic relationship between the two, isn't that right?
Right.
Yeah, so we should see some definite improvements. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about market research, because I think investors coming into our space would probably be interested in that. So what market research advice can you provide to potential investors in identifying specific preferences and needs of the local consumers? What could you say? Could you also point to any databases or information sources?
Well, I think the best advice is to actually do some research. If you're coming into our market, you should come in knowing what the consumers here want, knowing what our cultural preferences are and practices, so that you're able to take advantage of those and effectively insert yourselves. It doesn't make sense coming to a market that is completely unfamiliar to you, for which you have not made the necessary adjustments to ensure that there's going to be demand for your products. So I would advise companies, if you're coming here, do the research, do the ground research. There are local companies that provide market support. There's Action Coach, for instance, I know, that provides market research. There are other companies that provide market research. But if you're going into any new market, it is always good to start with the research. I'm not going to say that there are databases out there that would give you an indication of what are the demand preferences in Guyana. You know, that's another shortcoming that we've had in the past, not really producing a wide range or typologies of statistics that could benefit foreign investors. So there may not be databases that you can readily tap into to give you market information other than the general macroeconomic framework, what's per capita GDP, the rate of inflation, and minimum wages and those sorts of things, which you can get from the World Bank. You can also get from our Bureau of Statistics and the Bank of Guyana. So you can get general information on the macroeconomic environment. That data is readily available and quite accurate. What may be harder to come by is the more specific information on consumer preferences and demand patterns. And so, for that, you'd have to fill the gap by undertaking research with local partners. The university here is also perhaps a good partner to work with to undertake research on the market environment to give you that perspective that you probably would not be able to have as an outside entity.
Precise. Thank you for sharing this. Because we have so many companies coming into the market and believe that it's probably just another market, but you and I know that there are some issues in Guyana that has to be brought to the attention of the investor by a local entity who has been doing it.
Right.
And that also points to the partnership and what your partners can perhaps be helpful with, that local research, market research. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the issue of incentives, because people coming into Guyana would want to know about the government incentives that can be favorable to the investor. So are there a couple of incentives that you are aware of that you can point investors to?
Yes. There are incentives provided through the Guyana Office for Investment. So, in fact, I would advise any company interested in the local market to let that entity be your first port of call to understand what we have in place. There are incentives for and support to secure land for productive activities, to secure importation of equipment and machinery for investment. So any company that is coming in should first consult with the Guyana Office for Investment, because the incentives regime would vary based on the type of industry that you may be involved in. But those are generally some of the incentives provided. There's also in tariff waivers on certain types of products once they're going to be used for productive activities. So generally, those are what we have in place. And there are incentives provided for both exporters and investment companies coming into the market. So if you're going to export certain products that the government provides incentives for, then it would be useful to understand what those are and ensure that you're able to benefit from them. Right, so they're incentives both ways: investment facilitation as well as export promotion. With respect to export promotion, one of the priority sectors has been agriculture and light manufacturing. So there's support for accessing machinery, equipment, and land. There are tariff waivers if you're going to export what we define as non-traditional products. And there are also waivers to import machinery and equipment for certain manufacturing industries.
Wow. Thank you for this, for sharing this. And whilst we talk about import export, it would be remiss of me not to speak on the issue of e-commerce. So, what are your views on establishing an e-commerce support framework in Guyana?
Well, COVID kind of reinforced the importance of making that shift, that paradigm shift, to having an electronic framework in place to support all areas of human existence, and e-commerce is no different. A lot of companies are going to be, from various other parts of the world, are going to be looking towards Guyana. They want to understand the market before they get here. They want to understand the regulatory environment. Having an e-commerce framework in place would allow for a relevant repository of information to support them. But it's not just about that. It's also about supporting business activities, providing an opportunity for your exporters, your services providers, to expand their services and their reach, because you have a framework that allows for electronic transactions. Presently, we do not do that. We don't have that. And so, for instance, let's say the craft industries, you might have potential buyers abroad, but you don't have a supporting payment arrangement to facilitate that. So having an e-commerce framework in place, it helps to fill so many gaps, both in having a repository of information as well as facilitating online transactions. And in fact, locally, we've seen an emergence of online transactions. You have persons taking advantage of Facebook Marketplace to sell products locally. But the supporting framework needs to really be scaled up to facilitate, a higher volume of transactions electronically, and to allow us to deepen our reach to other markets where persons would be willing to take advantage of our products. But because of the limitations of some transactions still being traditional, they're not really able to do so at this point.
And hopefully we can come around to getting it all done quickly, because it really
Yes,
does support the small business environment, and the growing businesses as well.
certainly.
Right. So I wanted to look at the whole issue of sustainability and ESG, environment, social, and governance strategies, and to ask you, what are there any specific environmental or social considerations that you would like to point to, or to point the investors to, in coming into Guyana as they try to engage with government, with community, with academia, etc.? Are there any social or environmental considerations?
Yes, in terms of environmental considerations, I think there should be general knowledge out there regarding the low carbon development strategy, which is an initiative that the government has adopted to guide their governance approach. And so, respect for the environment is certainly a principle that all companies, including foreign companies, would be expected to abide by. So, the first thing I wanted to point out is compliance with the environmental regulations of the country, which could be found through the Environmental Protection Authority. Certain enterprises, because of the nature of their activities, are required to have environmental permits. And so it's important to understand the regulatory environment and to ensure that you're in compliance. With respect to general corporate, social, and community outreach and engagement, this is a useful strategy for any business that is seeking to cement itself in the local market. It's not obligatory in law, but it's certainly a moral obligation and expectation on the part of society that you're going to support community development. One of the concerns with respect to development is always the extent to which it's going to trickle down to the very low level, the local communities. And corporations help that trickle down to take place a bit more effectively when they're willing to engage and support communities through various initiatives. And so I would encourage companies to, in terms of ensuring that you want to sustain your operations and grow in the Guyanese market, that you support various community initiatives. There are initiatives related to sports, community development, even with respect to the university, providing tertiary education, in terms of the services we provide, the environment. There are so many areas where corporations could provide support, and by doing so, it would help them to grow in the Guyanese market, and it will help the country as well. It's going to contribute towards the wider sustainable development goals by helping some of the growth happening at a wider macro level to really trickle down to those groups at the bottom, especially if you're working with vulnerable groups. You're targeting vulnerable communities. Are you working in vulnerable areas, such as at-risk youths? Those are all going to have a significant impact on the country's sustainable development over the long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a moral obligation. It helps the government and it helps the people of Guyana,
People,
as
that's
well
right.
as it creates brand awareness. In
Right.
doing that, so
Those
I
loyalty.
think absolutely it really does build brand loyalty. So let's. I just wanted to and thank you for sharing. I wanted to go back on the export potential. In your opinion, what key sectors or industries in Guyana have the highest export potential and why? I know we pointed to some before, but if you have to give it in a nutshell.
All right, so they're the obvious ones, elephants in the room, oil and gas, and their range of industries that could emerge along the entire supply chain for oil and gas products that would offer opportunities. But other areas include gold and diamonds, minerals. Prior to oil and gas, 50% of our export earnings actually came from gold. And generally, when the global economy is experiencing a recession, when any recessionary impacts, gold tends to be the currency, the asset that people turn to. It's not subject to inflation. It's the best way to hold your wealth. And so over time, you find that the price tends to increase. And we saw that during the 2008 financial crisis. We saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. Gold prices went up. So we just happen to be blessed with an abundance of gold and other mineral products. And so there are potential there for companies to exploit. And in fact, one of the things I wanted to mention, I don't know if we'd come back to it at some point, but in terms of export potential and emerging markets or markets that we've seen grown, one of the markets we've experienced a growth in is in the United Arab Emirates. And the main product that we've really been exporting there is gold and diamonds. Over 22 years, that market grew by about 45.9%, which is the most significant export growth we have seen, even compared to our traditional markets in the West, the United States, and the European Union, the United Kingdom in particular. So there are lots of potential in gold, especially to, I would say, emerging markets such as India, where there's a strong demand for gold jewelry because it's a part of their cultural practices and gifting practices. So there's a lot of potential in gold. I think the potential also exists because we don't refine, we don't create value-added products. We export mainly in the primary form. The primary form is not always the best because prices tend to fluctuate at that level. The more you're able to add value, the more that you're able to earn in terms of export revenues. And so there's a lot of potential in value addition in gold. And I would also point to the agricultural sector with respect to rice. We've seen a growth in exportation of rice, but and not only rice, there are other areas where there are potentials. If we were to look at value addition, we are still at a stage where most of our exportation is at a primary level, where globally there are fluctuations in prices and the terms of trade tends to deteriorate. It's not in our favor when you're at the bottom of the value chain, the global value chain. It makes sense to always move up into value-added activities. So any company that is looking to take advantage of productive opportunities in the value-added sector, I think they're going to position themselves well. For agricultural sector, you'll be enabling yourself to respond to regional demand in the tourism industry, the hotel sector in particular, as well as in other markets further afield. So those are the three sectors I think offer the most potential.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this. It's a serious education, and the whole issue of being the bottom of the global value chain. We've been there for such a long time. We really need to
Right.
find these value added opportunities, and hopefully some of the investors coming into our spaces are thinking about that and definitely listening to our podcast here. So I wanted to ask you about. The competitiveness of Guyanese products and services. But you've spoken already about gold, and what it does in the UAE. Is there anything else you wanted to point to as it relates to the competitiveness of, the Guyanese products and services, particularly regionally as well as internationally in these markets?
All right, so I don't have hardcore data to really shore up my responses here, but there's just one thing I want to point to. We are competitive for two reasons. We're price competitive, that is. Um, our exchange rate is low relative to the global vehicular currency, the United States dollar. It's generally a managed float that really is going to be kept within that band, I believe, for the foreseeable future. So that's going to allow us to remain price competitive globally. And the exchange rate is a very important indicator of your global competitiveness. Um, and the other thing I wanted to point to that I believe gives us a measure of price competitiveness is our wage rate, our minimum wage rate, set just about 300 US dollars on a monthly basis. Also allows us to be price competitive because it's not very high. Who knows? Perhaps it's going to change, and that's going to alter price competitiveness. But for the most part, we are price competitive with what we export currently. Perhaps where we are a bit deficient would be in our ability to compete on the basis of quality, because there's still a lot to be done in terms of the soft infrastructure to support compliance with global standards, and to ensure that we're able to really compete on the basis of quality. But with respect to price, because of the wage rate, the minimum wage rate, and our exchange rate, I would say we're price competitive within the region as well as globally.
Wow. Thank you for sharing this. Um, the minimum wage, we really want to hope that it can get, at least better,
But
because three
that's
hundred
certainly what
dollars
the
is really
workers would want.
that's
The
it. But
companies would have a different interest.
absolutely. Well, I'm a company, but I still believe that we need to make it competitiveness. Will it also has its impact in the deliverable as well, because you have people not paid right. Do we get the kind of output from them that we are looking for?
Yes,
You
yeah, that is
understand?
certainly
Yes.
true.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about access to export financing or insurance, to mitigate any of the risks that we have. But more specifically, can we just can you give us some guidance on access to export financing,
I'm
if
not
there is anything
sure.
you know of? Hmm.
Mhm. Um, I did mention before that we have an incentive regime in place. We have a duty-free, VAT-free regime for companies that also want to export. That's the main form of export support that we have. Apart from that, I'm not aware of any measures in place to provide export financing to Guyanese companies. Insurance is also an area that is a bit deficient. For the larger companies producing manufactured products, they might be able to obtain insurance through existing insurance companies. The challenge has always been with respect to crop insurance for small farmers and small businesses that are a bit more risky. So that is an area that is, but that has to be addressed at the policy level first, filling the gap with respect to insurance on certain products. But for the larger companies, they're able to obtain insurance because they're less they're less risky with respect to what they're producing.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to talk about trade agreements, but I remembered earlier in the conversation you spoke about the WTO and the Treaty of Chagaramas as well. You know,
Mhm.
both the international treaties, domestic, regional agreements, etc. So I will move on here to ask just about, you know, how active is trade in your view with Brazil under the Guyana Brazil partial scope agreement? Because I think that's one we probably didn't mention. You mentioned quite a number before.
Yes, the Guyana Brazil announced St. Kitts
St. Kitts, yes.
because they acceded to the agreement. Yes, partial
Indeed.
scope agreement. Um, as with most of our agreements, it's a bit unexplored. It does provide duty-free access for partners, both parties, but it's not very active. Um, and the reason is because of the limitations with respect to infrastructure connectivity between the two regions. You know, we've been discussing a road between Guyana and Brazil for a very long time, but it has not yet fully materialized. And so it's really challenging to get products from Brazil to Guyana and vice versa because the connectivity in terms of the transport infrastructure is not there. So we're not able to really take advantage of the market. Closer to the border, the hinterland communities, you'll find a lot of trade between Guyana and Brazil because of proximity, but not necessarily in the products that may be covered under the agreement. I won't say that language is a significant barrier. It is a hurdle, but not a significant one. The biggest hurdle is really the transport connectivity, right? So while Brazil is a very big market, very lucrative, until we're able to really get that road fully completed and reduce the accessibility challenges, we're not really going to be able to take advantage of the Brazil Guyana partial scope agreement.
Agreement. Thank you for sharing that, and we hope that this infrastructural work can quickly happen, because you know Brazil is number two, number one in the world for so many, you know, export or trade related activities, that I think that that's an opportunity,
Yes, it's
you
the
know,
second
missed.
largest economy in
You're
the
right.
northern
The
hemisphere
northern, yeah.
after the United States.
Precise. Okay, so I wanted to talk about market entry strategies, and just to ask for the benefit of the listeners, are there any specific market entry barriers that foreign investment businesses should be aware of, and how can they navigate them?
Mhm. If we're talking specifically about the Guyanese market, I guess foreign enterprises might view our local content legislation as a barrier because it requires that you collaborate. I don't really see it as a barrier. I see it as a way of securing growth opportunities for our local enterprises. So for any company coming in, it's useful to uh, identify your local partners through the umbrella authorities, and that will ensure that you're able to get into the market. I don't believe there are significant barriers in the Guyanese market. The Guyana Office for Investment is very clear on what are the requirements to invest here and provides a very supportive environment with respect to ensuring that you're able to understand our regulatory environment and helping you to navigate the environment from start to finish. Because once a company is interested in the market, that support is provided um, as from the point of expressing an interest right through. That support is there. So I think what companies may perceive as hurdles might be access to information, but those could be circumvented once you understand and you're aware of the institutions that are mandated to provide you with certain information. Just take advantage of those services and you'll be able to circumvent that challenge. It depends on what you're producing or providing. Some companies might view the culture as a challenge, as a potential hurdle. because we have a very diversified culture, which means that there are going to be nuances in what products are demanded and preferred. But I think that could be circumvented by doing your market research, so you understand the market and you understand where to place yourself in terms of price points, and how to to lay out a strategy for targeting the various subgroups that might be present here. Otherwise, I don't really see us having much hurdles. Perhaps the other thing I want to point to is the size of our market, right? Because we're talking about all the opportunities we have here, but we are still a market of under 1 million people, which is very small. It means that our absorptive capacity with respect to the number of companies that could come in here is very limited. But that could also be circumvented if you're producing for export, right? Companies that are targeting the export market could circumvent the limitations that come with having a small market, a small consumption market, because this market doesn't really offer you much scope for economies of scale. So you have to be producing with the export market in mind to really take advantage.
Of that. Okay. And finally my question, and thank you for sharing before. My question is on the issue of capacity building. Are you aware of training or capacity building programs to enhance the export readiness of Guyanese businesses? I'm speaking particularly at the university or even with companies and organizations.
There are a number of different types of agencies that are providing capacity building support. One that comes readily to mind is the Center for Local Business Development. Not necessarily targeted at exportation, but really just providing training and capacity support to local enterprises, so that they're able to respond to opportunities in the oil and gas sector. And some of them could potentially expand to exportation. There are other government ministries and entities that provide training as well, as the need arises. There's the Guyana Office for Investment that would provide support. The Ministry of Tourism, Industry and Commerce would provide support as well. With respect to standards and quality, you may be able to get training from the Guyana Manufacturing and Services Association as well, and the private sector associations, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Manufacturing and Services Association. Those also provide training, but of course, those training opportunities are directed at their members. So those are entities that are providing support. So yes, there are capacity building initiatives, perhaps a bit sporadic, but there are opportunities there. It's really just keeping yourself informed so that when an opportunity arises, you can take advantage.
Absolutely. Okay, so Dianna, thank you so much for your time today. I could sit and listen to you forever and a day, because there's so much when it comes to trade and how trade affects our economy here in Guyana, especially when it comes to investment promotion. There are investors coming into Guyana who have those questions. They come to Cerulean Inc. to help them with the development of their ideas or to get into the local market. And we see all of those questions that I have put together for you being asked. And it's nothing like when you pull together, the experts in the field who can give the information that they require. The one thing that we do not end our podcast unless we give you an opportunity to tell our audience how they can find you. And further, is there anything that you are working on at this time that you'd like to showcase here on our podcast? We give you a couple of minutes to do that.
All right, so if you want to find me, I'm here at the University of Guyana. The university has a website, www.uog.edu.gy, so you can find us on the internet. You can find us on social media. The faculty in particular has a Facebook page, so you can find us. and you know my name. So once you find the university's website or Facebook page, my contact details would be there.
Right.
I must, of course, speak to the fact that as a faculty, we have a range of expertise that could provide market support, research, analysis of companies that want to come in here. You want to understand the market and you need that support. The university is here to provide you with that service. We also, of course, provide training courses, both at the undergraduate and postgraduate level for companies that want to augment the capacity of their staff. Feel free to explore us. But I think perhaps what our greatest offering is in our research capacity. We are here and available to provide market support, to provide analyses to any companies that want to understand the local framework, the implications for competing and for accessing foreign markets. Those are some of the things that we could provide support on. So thank you so much for affording us the opportunity. And we are here and ready to serve the Guyanese community, investors, anybody who's willing to take advantage of our services at the required fee, of course.
Absolutely. The podcast is free as it is. So, if they're coming to you, trust me, they will. They will be ready to pay. But are you on LinkedIn, Dr. DaSilva-Glasgow?
I am on LinkedIn personally.
Excellent.
Yes.
So they can also find you on LinkedIn, right?
Right. You could find me there as well.
Excellent. Great.
Yes.
So
Thank
I
you so
want to
much.
personally thank you for your time. From the team at Above Board, we want to say thank you so much. And we look forward to speaking. And we will be reaching out to engage in you again in the future.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
This wraps up today's episode of Above Board, brought to you by Cerulean Incorporated. We are dedicated to elevating businesses in Guyana and the Caribbean through innovation, ethical practices, and high integrity, and a deep commitment to excellence. Cerulean is your partner in navigating the complexities of business growth and success. Are you planning to start or expand your business within the Guyanese market? Cerulean Incorporated is here to guide you. Learn more about how we can help by visiting www.cerulean-management.com or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Cerulean Inc. or Cerulean_Incorporated. Join us next time on Above Board, where we continue to unlock the potential for success in Guyana's thriving business landscape.